Hello parents. Today I'm going to talk with you about the 3 major hindrances to setting limits effectively. And I imagine all of you want to set limits effectively and have your children learn from the limits that you're setting. Discipline comes from a word which means to teach. So when we discipline our children and set limits with them, we are actually trying to teach them something. We do want them to learn, not just to obey us in the moment, but to learn what it is we're trying to teach them so that the off-track behavior or whatever it is that they're doing that we don't want them to continue to do won't continue in the future, long term. So we want to think long term when we set limits. One of the things that I found in all of the research I've done on limit setting, from about 13 different theories of parenting, they all have the same thing in common. They all say that it's very important to avoid emotional white noise. That's my term, but each of the theories says it in a slightly different way. Let me just put this over here. So what does that mean, emotional white noise? When we set limits, we often are feeling a little bit triggered. Let's be real. When our child is playing with the laundry that we just folded and we say, please stop, I'm folding the laundry, and the child keeps playing with it, and we say, please stop, I asked you to stop. You're going to knock it over if you keep doing that. And then the child stops and then comes back and starts playing with it again and knocks it over, and then, I told you, look what you've done. Can't you listen? You should have listened by now. You're old enough to hear. So all of that I just kind of showed you, raised my voice a little bit, big body language, all of that is emotional white noise. A lot of it nonverbal, not just my words that I was using, and some of it was shaming, like, you should know by now. That's shaming language, that's verbal emotional white noise. There was also body language, gestures, facial expression, tone of voice. So all of that matters. And what that communicates to a little body is threat. This person that you rely on for your love and care and sustenance is feeling very threatened and looks very threatening. And all of that emotional white noise gets in the way of the child learning that you really don't want them playing with the laundry. That message gets lost. This is what they hear. Wah, 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 wah. So the actual teaching gets lost in all of the other stuff that's coming at them quite intensely often. The tone of voice, the volume, the gesturing, that communicates threat to their little limbic brains, their emotional brains. So if I make a little fist in my right hand and I plop my brain out to the side of my head, this is kind of a little model of what it would look like. So my thumb is in the middle, my fingers are wrapped around my thumb. And the prefrontal cortex is around the forehead area or even behind the eyeballs. So that would be signified by my middle finger and my ring finger knuckles. That's the prefrontal cortex. And then if we open the 4 fingers up and we look at the nail bed of the thumb, that's around where the limbic brain lies. So the prefrontal cortex is involved with emotional regulation and higher order thinking. And the thumb, the nail bed of the thumb, is around the area where the limbic brain lies, which is the emotional brain. And what happens when we act from our emotional brain, when we're wah, 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 it activates their emotional brain and it communicates threat. And then all of the blood and energy that could be in their higher order thinking brain gets pulled into their emotional brain, and there's a big warning signal. It says, warning, 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 danger, danger, danger. And Dan Siegel calls this flipping their lids. When they flip their lids, they no longer have a connection between their regulatory brain, the higher order thinking brain, and their emotional brain. And when we bring a lot of emotional white noise to the moment, we've flipped our lids. We're no longer able to regulate our emotions because we've flipped our lids. So one of the biggest things that gets in the way of setting limits effectively with our kids is when we flip our lids, when we lose our ability to manage our emotions well, and we communicate threat verbally and non-verbally to our kids. It sends alarm bells to their limbic brains. It causes them to flip their lids so they can't think well anymore. And then a whole cascade of events unfolds within their little bodies when there's a warning signal in their limbic brain. It starts to send messages to the body to release cortisol, stress hormones, and adrenaline so that they can get primed to fight or flee. The fight or flight system goes off. And what we know now through research and studies is that cortisol and adrenaline get in the way of learning. We can't take in new information well when there's cortisol and adrenaline surging through our little bodies. So this is not a time to teach when we are feeling emotional, when we are feeling triggered. That's a time for us to perhaps take a self-time out and say, I'm recognizing I'm starting to get frustrated. I'm going to take a time out. And I really want to encourage you to notice that I didn't say, I'm really getting frustrated with you. So this is not an at you thing. That's, again, communicating threat and will send warning signals to their little bodies. It's more, I'm going to take a time out. I'm noticing I'm getting frustrated. It's my frustration, not because of you. Even if you're the trigger of my frustration, it's still mine. I take ownership of my emotional state, my triggers. I'm feeling frustrated right now. I'm going to take a time out. And then we can remove ourselves from the situation. If it's not that intense of an emotional response within us, we can just notice it using our mindfulness practice that we've been cultivating and practicing. Frustration's here. And I can soften around it. And then I can move on to set the limit more effectively, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the main thing is that it's important for us to take ownership of our emotional reactions when we're setting limits. Most of us learn that either limits don't get set or they get set with harshness and tension. But there is another way. We can set limits calmly, neutrally, even playfully. And this comes from the work of Patty Whiffler with playful limit setting, as well as one of her students and now author, Larry Cohen. And he has a lovely book called Playful Parenting. And Patty Whiffler's book is called Listen. I encourage you to look into those books. So, the next hindrance to effective limit setting, let's see if I can manage this well here, is the content trap. So in the content trap, we get hooked by our child's questions and debates. But why can't I do it? It's so unfair. Why don't you just let me do it? And when kids say, why, most parents who are trying to be kind and loving and attuned and not emotionally reactive will get hooked. So in an attempt not to get emotionally reactive, we can get hooked by the content trap and enter into long debates with our kids. And Susan Stifelman calls this lawyering. Then all of a sudden, we are raising a little lawyer who can debate for an hour about our rule or our limit. And this is something that would be helpful to avoid if you want to be effective with your limit setting. It is a way to set limits, but long-term not so effective. And this is also true of the emotional white noise. When we bring emotional white noise to the moment, we're not being effective long-term because we're not helping the child learn what it is we're trying to teach them about the laundry. We are maybe getting compliance in the moment, but that compliance in the moment is often out of fear, and fear will either cause the child to rebel, which will not lead to long-term effectiveness. It will lead to long-term rebelling, or it will cause the child to obey out of fear and could lead to a lifelong experience of anxiety, hypervigilance, not wanting to upset anyone ever because people can get big and scary sometimes and we don't know when or why, so we're going to be on edge all of the time. So not so effective to breed a hypervigilant, anxious kid. Probably not what we want. Okay, so not so effective long-term, content trap, not so effective long-term. What does this look like? So child says, why can't I have a cookie now? Well, because we want you to be really healthy, and we really care a lot about health and wellness, and look, we exercise every day, and we talk about these kinds of vegetables, but I just had this cookie, yesterday, and why can't I have it today? And you gave Susie a cookie, and then the debate goes on. So we say too much, we get caught up in the content, we use too many words, we go into long rationalizations with our child, all to try to stay regulated, not yell at them, not be tense with them, not be tight with them. But the child is learning something. They're learning that our rules can be stepped over and avoided with long-winded content. And they're not learning to respect and honor the limit. So not so effective, even though it comes from a deeply loving place. And I really honor parents who get into the content trap because they're really working hard to avoid the emotional white noise. So I bow to you, I understand. It's just not effective to get caught in the content trap. And then it also leads to kids, both of those can lead to kids who are getting into content traps with their teachers, walking all over their rules, rebels, in the emotional white noise case, rebels who go to other kids' houses and they don't care to listen to their parents' rules because they've learned to rebel against them, or teachers. So these habitual ways of responding to our children when we're setting limits really does impact their lives outside of the home as well, and can lead to lower self-esteem as they get messages from other teachers and parents of, oh, what's going on with this kid? He's not listening to me. And then the third hindrance to effective limit setting is when parents, out of the desire to avoid snapping emotionally at their kids or yelling at them or shaming them, is that they try to set limits, but they don't enforce the limits. So they set, but don't enforce the limit. What does this look like? This looks like, Jimmy, stop throwing the ball over the house. Jimmy, it's going to end up in someone else's yard. Jimmy, stop throwing the ball. Oh, never mind. Whatever. I'm just going to have a sip of wine. So the parent is setting the limit. They're amping up. They're feeling frustrated. And then they come to a tipping point where their frustration starts getting so intense that they shut down. Maybe they're touching old wounds from their own past when scary things would happen. Or maybe that's how their parents set limits. They would set, but not enforce, and then the kid would just keep doing it. So it could be modeling, or it could be the parent in the moment is coming up against some really scary memories themselves, and they just want to shut down and stop it all. Or they don't want to tip over into emotional white noise, shaming, blaming, yelling, screaming, so they just stop and drop it and say it's not worth it. So this also comes from a very loving place. I bow to these parents. I honor you. I see the love from which this pattern comes. It's just not helpful for the kids. The kids, long-term, in terms of long-term effectiveness, they'll learn to step all over the limits. They'll learn that limits are set and stated, but you don't have to follow them. And this also carries over into other people's houses and into classrooms, and can really be tough for teachers. So these are the three hindrances: bringing too much emotion and tension and emotional tension into the moment with emotional white noise, getting caught in the content trap, which leads to debate and lawyering, and setting but failing to enforce the limits. So what can help? What can help is what I learned from my mentor, Patty Wiffler. I'll feel forever indebted to her because her teachings really have helped me raise a child who listens to limits in my house, at other people's houses, in the classroom. And here's how. helpful, what's helpful, let's see if I can place this here, is to be calm, confident, and in charge. So instead of having emotional white noise, softening our bodies, naming the frustration, naming the tension. I'm noticing I'm getting tense, and I'm going to soften around that tension. I'm going to come calm and confident and in charge. When we get emotional white noise, it's a sign that we're feeling threatened. It's when a lion roars, or a cat hisses, hiss, they're feeling threatened. So when a parent yells or shames or raises their voice, it's a sign that they're feeling threatened. And we want to avoid communicating to our child that we're feeling threatened. So we want to come calm, warm smile, soft eyes, confident and in charge, standing tall. And then convey the message, convey the teaching. So there's more to this, but we'll get to that next. So in order to combat the content trap, we can use 3 words when we set the limit. I said no. The answer is no. Not today, sweetie. 3 words. So Patty Whiffler encourages us to wait at least 1 minute after we set the limit and just hear all that the child has to say. And then during that time, we're listening. We're listening openly, we're listening warmly. They are probably going to have lots of feelings about our limit. Setting a limit calmly and confidently and in charge isn't going to make the child just magically listen the first 100 times or 1,000 times. The first 100 or 1,000 times, the child is going to have lots of upset about that limit. So when we set the limit, we can listen to their upset. In positive discipline, we say yes to the feelings, say no to the behavior. So set a limit on the behavior and then listen to their feelings about that limit. No, Jimmy. No throwing the ball. I said no. Well, Mom, why can't I throw the ball? You let me throw it yesterday, why? Content trap. So instead of saying, because when the ball goes over the thing, and all of this, and this is why, and I know it's not fair, but this is why I'm doing it, because Nope, I said no, Jimmy. But why aren't you answering me? The answer is no. But why? Why can't I do it? Why? I'll tell you later. Why won't you tell me now? And upset. So I'm saying yes to your feelings. You can have lots of feelings about this limit, but it's still the limit. This is the limit. I like to think about the speed limit when we think about 3 words and avoiding the content trap. So the speed limit doesn't have a whole paragraph as to why the speed limit's here. It just says 65 miles per hour. Speed limit, 65 miles per hour. Or store closing and opening times. You know, we could imagine we get into long debates with someone who's trying to close and open the store if they were open to negotiation and lawyering about it. But instead it's just, nope, the store opens at 10. And the store closes at 6. These are the hours. Simple, and non-reactive. You know, imagine if when we were going through a speed zone of 65 miles per hour and we were going 75 and a cop stops us and says, "What do you think you were doing? What, did you see that sign? Can't you read? You're old enough to be able to read now." Imagine if the cop said that to us. Instead, they stay calm. They're confident. They're in charge. They say, "License and registration, please. Here's your ticket." Right? So now we're getting into enforcement. Come close. Make a connection and bring the limit to the child. So the police officer comes close to us and pulls over. He gets out of his car. He doesn't scream at us from his car, "What were you doing? What did you think? I'm giving you a ticket," from his car. He gets out of his car. He comes to us. He makes a connection. So I think about this also as communicating information from our laptop to our iPhone. We can scream all we want. We can try to send that information, that really good information from our laptop to the iPhone, but it's not going to get communicated unless we first establish a connection. So the establishment of connection is key in effective limit setting, and it's also effective long term because it's relationship building. And when we have strong relationships, our kids naturally cooperate more. They want to cooperate. We can help them by refraining from disrupting that precious relationship with our emotional white noise, shaming, blaming, yelling, screaming. So we can nourish relationship as we set a limit, listen to their feelings, come close and make a connection, and bring the limit to the child. So instead of saying, Jimmy, stop throwing that ball over the... Jimmy, stop throwing. Jimmy, did you hear me? I said stop throwing. We can come over to Jimmy and we can say, get down to Jimmy's level. So bend down, calm, warm, and say, hey, Jimmy, no throwing that ball over the house. Thanks. It's warm, it's calm, it's connected. So it's both calm, confident, and in charge, and also close and connected, right? We're enforcing the limit that way. That's how we can enforce the limit, by bringing the limit to them. The cop gets out of the car and brings the limit to us. That's enforcement. And we all know that there are certain, phases of the highway where cops don't hang out. And we all know we can speed through those places because it's not enforced. So if we set the limit, we see the speed limit, it's still there, but it's not enforced. If we set but don't enforce the limit, and kids will learn they can walk all over the limit, like we learn that in the highway. But if it's set and enforced, that leads to effective limit setting. But the way we enforce matters, not with harshness and emotional white noise that will disrupt the relationship, which will lead to ineffective limit setting, but with calm, closeness, warmth, and listening. Set the limit and listen to the feelings. Right? So that's something a cop doesn't do. A cop doesn't listen to our feelings about the ticket, and we don't feel close to most cops. But with parents, we want to nourish the parent-child relationship. So we want to be effective disciplinarians. We want to discipline our kids. We need them to bump up against rules and limits. It will help build their self-esteem because they can do this well then in other parents' houses and also in school. And they'll get positive feedback from peers and teachers and parents. But we want to do it in a way that builds relationship with them. And we do that by listening to their feelings about the limit. So I encourage you to explore these 3 ways of setting limits more effectively and avoiding the 3 major hindrances. Take good care. I wish you well as you nourish your relationship with your child as you set limits with them. Blessings to you.